Good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to this webinar organised by Resilience First in partnership with the Foundation for Science and Technology. For those of you who weren't able to view the opening video, Resilience First's mission is to help build resilience across business communities, whether those communities be defined by geography or by special interest. As we all struggle to manage the consequences of COVID-19, as well as the growing climate crisis and the Brexit looming, then focus has rightly turned to how the country can prepare its current and future workforce for the skills of tomorrow, rather than relying on the skills of the past. As many employees will need to acquire new qualifications, training and trades in what will be a more varied portfolio of careers, then being resilient to change, agile in grasping opportunities will be important facets in future employment market. A recent survey by the CBI and McKinsey revealed that 9 in 10 employees, or 30 million people in the UK, will need to learn new skills or be retrained entirely for the next decade, cost of £13 billion per year. And that includes 21 million people who will need to learn basic digital skills. Within the concept of surviving and thriving, which is our motto, and efforts to build back better, as the government proclaims, then both employees and employers will need to work together, along with government, to shape the future world of work. Hence, we've organised today's webinar to shed some light on aspects of the skills resilience agenda and what it means for people, businesses and communities. And we are fortunate to have as co-partners on today's webinar the Foundation for Science and Technology and the chair of that organisation as the chair of this webinar. In a minute, I will invite Gavin Costigan as Chief Executive of FST to say a few words about the work of the Foundation and introduce the chair, who will in turn introduce our speakers. Just before I do, I encourage all who've registered for this webinar to ask questions of the speakers throughout the session by posting your brief questions in the chat box to the right of your screen. And I'm sure the chair will pick up as many as he can as we enter the Q&A session. So thank you from me, and Gavin, over to you.
Thanks, Robert. For those who are less familiar with the Foundation for Science and Technology, we provide a platform for debate on policy issues that have a science, research, technology or innovation element, with stakeholders from 4 main groups: from Parliament, from government, industry and the research community. The issue of skills is one that we regularly return to at the Foundation, and in particular the connection between what business needs, what further and higher education can and should deliver, and what government can do to regulate and to incentivize. As Robert has said, the COVID crisis will accelerate an existing trend for employees needing to retrain and reskill throughout a much more varied career. And the question we want to ask ourselves is, what can different stakeholders do to help and enable that to happen? And that's what we're hoping to get out of today's webinar. Our chair today is Lord Willits, David Willits, who is chair of the Foundation for Science and Technology and also president of the Intergenerational Centre at the Resolution Foundation. David was an MP between 1992 and 2015. He was Minister for Universities and Science between 2010 and 2014. He is a visiting professor at King's College. He is on the board of UK Research and Investment. He's an honorary fellow of the Royal Society, and he has a number of other appointments as well. David, over to you.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you, Robert, and welcome all of you to this very important discussion about skills. And I see it as breaking down into 3 key issues. First of all, it does look as if the virus is driving real structural change in the economy. The shift to online retail was already underway, but it's clearly been massively accelerated by the virus. But what kind of structural shift do we think there will be? There may be other sectors, the care sector, for example, where the continuing growth is largely unaffected by the virus. We may see in manufacturing the challenge of operating facilities when the virus is around, meaning a further impetus to automation. But any kind of sense of what structural change we think is underway, even though it is so hard to predict. And that brings us to the second issue. That's why resilient skills matter. Skills which will be relevant, even though we cannot be confident exactly which sectors will be growing and which shrinking in the British economy over the years ahead. So what are these resilient skills? Robert boldly said the skills of the future will not be the same as the skills of the past. Well, I think literacy and numeracy are pretty important resilient skills, even looking ahead. Those are new skills as well, like digital skills, whereas we know, sadly, the UK does not score as highly as we should. So what are these resilient skills that our participants would like to see us developing? And then thirdly and finally, what are the actual policy implications that follows? The Prime Minister gave quite a bold announcement on investment in skills, including a lifetime skills guarantee, only the other week. Of course, there's a lot of detail to be fleshed out, but what do people think of that? What policy levers could government pull in order to deliver these resilient skills in the future? So there's a lot to talk about. We have three excellent panelists who are going to introduce the subject, and we'll start with Ben Fletcher, who is Director of Policy at Make UK. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Lord Willits, and thank you also to Robert and Gavin for their introductions. Robert mentioned the CBI in his introduction. I would like to say on behalf of Make UK that other trade associations are available, and Make UK is one of the country's big five manufacturing and trade associations. The CBI, Institute of Directors, Federation of Small Business, and the Chamber of Commerce and ourselves work very closely together on a range of cross-cutting issues, working closely with Number 10, with the Department for Business and the Treasury, and have been very, very heavily engaged over the last few weeks and months in the COVID response and the COVID challenge. And in many respects, that tees up what I want to talk to you about today. But it is worth taking a little bit of a step backwards to understand the specific issues in manufacturing and some of the challenges that both big and small companies across the country have faced for a long time, and then to think a little bit about how the pandemic has affected those challenges and where we think we will go next. Manufacturing has been a renaissance industry over the last 20 years, and actually public perception still lags some way behind the reality of where the sector is today. The British public, when we last surveyed them, think that Britain is somewhere in the mid-50s globally in terms of where it ranks as a manufacturing power, and that would put us somewhere around the level of Kazakhstan. The reality is we're one of the world's top 10 manufacturing nations and are competing with the USA, with Germany, with China, and so on in terms of the work that we do and the impact that we have. And currently, the topic of international trade in relation to Brexit and international trade deals is particularly pertinent. And although manufacturing is about 12% of the entire UK economy at its core, it's slightly larger if you also add in some of the supporting industries that work with and rely on manufacturing for business. It's about 12% of the economy at its purest level, but we provide about half of all of our exports. So we punch above our weight when it comes to international trade and exports. So the sector is thriving, it's growing, and in recent years, the renaissance that I talked about has been sparked by the fact that Britain is now one of the very best, arguably the best country in the world in utilising just-in-time logistics. And we have seen a rebirth of our car industry. The Nissan plant in Sunderland produces more cars at that one site than the entire Italian car industry does. So when you add in some of those things across different sectors, aviation, a really strong space industry, and many other core aspects, electronics and so on, we've had a real rebirth of manufacturing in the UK in the last few years. The challenge has been that renaissance has been moving at a faster pace than the skills development in the UK has been able to keep up. And actually, despite the challenges of Brexit and COVID and many other things over recent years, manufacturing companies, when surveyed, have still put skills as their #1 issue, even above those two, even in the last few years of challenge and anxiety. And that is because we have a fantastic university sector that is able to produce really, really capable, highly skilled graduates in engineering, and in particular, as we move forward, some of the digital aspects of engineering. But where we have struggled is to keep pace with the medium level technical skilled people, not graduates, not people in the highly skilled category, but really the technicians that drive the work that's done in factories and industrial plants around the country. And there are many, many reasons for that. It's not for the want of effort. It's not for the want of trying, both on behalf of successive governments and indeed on behalf of many industrial players as well. But we have a situation where about 1/3 of all vacancies in manufacturing at that technical skills level go unfilled for more than 3 months because there is such a shortage of qualified and highly capable technicians. That gap, I think, has been the case even despite the ability to access skilled labour from Europe. So the first challenge that manufacturing is going to face is that as it becomes harder to access skilled labour from Europe, we are anticipating that that skills gap is going to get more significant and more challenging. The other issue, I think, that is being very much exacerbated by COVID is the fact that firms who are now looking at the choices they have to make and the decisions about where they're going to spend their money over the next few years, and many of them now have much less money to spend than they anticipated. Many of them are in a process of making redundancies. There is a real challenge around apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are, in many respects, the long-term solution to this problem. If we can make a real step forward in bringing apprentices into manufacturing, people who are excited by working in a high-tech and interesting industry that produces high-quality goods and is hopefully going to really get to grips with the digital agenda, then apprenticeships are part of the long-term solution. There has actually been a real interest and an increase in interest amongst young people to take apprenticeships in the last few months. There's a tangible connection between the work we've been able to do and our member companies have been able to do to really demonstrate the value of engineering in a crisis, when we have seen things like British companies respond to the ventilator challenge, British companies respond to the need to get PPE into hospitals and care homes, British firms being able to ensure that even in the middle of the height of panic buying, we got food onto the shelves of supermarkets and people were able to continue to buy what they needed. And that's seen a real interest amongst young people in forging a career in manufacturing. The challenge is that the firms that need to take them on don't have the money to do so. Make UK runs its own high-tech apprentice training centre in Birmingham, and there's been a reduction from about an average intake of 300, 350 apprentices to this year well below 100. And that's not about enthusiasm, it's about the financial challenges that companies are facing. That's the sense of the scale of the problem. That's what's critical. What we think needs to be done is myriad. It's a very, very complex issue. It's a very long-term issue. But what is absolutely vital to ensure that firms have the skills that they need, and these are absolutely key to business resilience, people and skills. If you don't have them, you will not be resilient, you will not cope. We think it's absolutely critical that government really finally grasp the nettle and make some reforms to the apprentice levy. The apprentice levy is a very good idea, but has not quite worked, I think, in the way that people anticipated. We still see a number of issues around that, but in particular, it's a very, very precise and defined scheme. And I think if businesses had the ability to be more flexible in the way they use their apprentice money, it would be incredibly helpful. We also do need to look at some of the issues around the government's announcements about training and lifetime learning commitments. But one of the issues is that if you want to upskill manufacturers and take on the digital challenge, we again are somewhat stymied by the suggestion that if you've already got A-levels or equivalent qualifications, you won't be able to utilize some of the financial support. We're waiting to see the detail, but at face value, that could be a bit of a challenge because many people who've got professional technical skills have effectively reached that threshold already. COVID could be the dynamic traction at which we really accelerate the digital skills agenda. But if you've already got qualifications in existing skills, the challenge will be to enable you to utilize some of those provisions to upskill yourself and get digital skills. It's not simply about the acquisition of skills, it is critically about the upskilling of the existing workforce to complement, hopefully, a renewed push for apprenticeships. And one of the other things we're looking for is more flexibility around some of those schemes so that people with a strong skill set, but a skill set that is very much in existing skills, can have this opportunity now to move forward. And I think the final point is that we do anticipate, and sadly have already started to see, significant degrees of redundancy in manufacturing. These are skilled people. And one of the big challenges is that many of them are people at the end of their careers or towards the end of their careers who are the people that really have the skills that are close to dying out. What we need, and I think as well as very targeted responses around apprenticeships and the learning commitment, is also a regional focus. Manufacturing is disproportionately a large part of the economy in some of those bits of the country where the government wishes to level up and where there have often been particularly severe impacts from previous economic downturns. As well as the focus through business, there needs to be a regional focus so that there is a skills capability. And going back to where I started, one of the problems and one of the reasons why we found ourselves in a skill shortage situation in the first place was that actually the cost of providing engineering skills is very expensive. It's very unfair to always pick on hairdressing. We all need hairdressers. I would look even worse than I do this morning without one. But actually the cost to a training provider of providing a hairdressing apprenticeship is a fraction of the cost of providing an engineering and manufacturing apprenticeship because of the equipment you need to buy and maintain. And particularly when you look at the digital agenda, the very high-tech costs have a really, really significant investment challenge to the training sector. So what we need to see in order to address this is a real focus on providing training, supporting training providers so that we can take that big upstep in digital training and re-equip our workforce, both the new people coming in and the people already there, with the skills for the future. I hope that gives you an idea of some of the pressures that we're under in manufacturing. I don't want to overshoot my time, but very happy to pick up questions as we go forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ben. Of course, some of us do need hairdressing more than others, but anyway, still very valuable remarks. And let me just remind all the people who are participating in this event, if you do have questions or comments, do use the chat function and it'll help us identify the issues to raise with the panelists in the latter part of the seminar. Now we're going to go straight to Austin Okonwezi, who is the Deputy Director for Engagement and Planning, working on industrial strategy in Mile Department of Bays. Austin, you're very welcome. Over to you.
Morning, Lord Willits. Morning, everyone. And thank you very much for having me here. So as Lord Willits said, I'm from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And one of the primary responsibilities of the directorate I work in is to ensure we have an industrial strategy that delivers long-term economic growth and addresses the issues of low and slow productivity that the UK has faced for a very long time. Today's discussion on skills is pretty important to that agenda because, you know, as most, if not all of you will know, education and skills is a key component to addressing productivity challenges. You know, the ONS estimates, you know, that a fifth of the rise in productivity over the last 25 years can be attributed to improvements in the quality of the workforce. So it's pretty obvious that, you know, ensuring that businesses have access to the skilled workforce that they need is key to long-term economic growth and a more prosperous future economy. As everyone knows, it's really strange times, you know, and there's so many different factors impacting on our economic landscape, both at a national and global level. And there's probably nowhere else to start than COVID, which my previous panelists also mentioned. It's not only affected our way of life, but caused huge levels of unemployment. And many argue that we are unlikely to return to pre-COVID levels for a while. So many sectors have been badly hit and under pressure. and it's fair to say that some of these sectors may not fully recover to their pre-crisis baselines, and it might have to be a case of rebuilding and moving in a new direction rather than returning to the status quo. And if we look at the people who are likely to be affected, we know the young, the lower paid, and likely women may actually be more affected than others. And then apart from COVID, you also have to deal with sort of global trends that we need to take into account, the impact of automation and technological change, and what impact that has on the workforce. In 2017, it was estimated about 7% of jobs in the UK were at high risk of being affected by automation, and about a further 65%, at medium risk. I think depending on how long we have to deal with the pandemic, it's reasonable to expect that we will see an acceleration of automation, particularly if traditional labor is seen as too unreliable in view of having to work to a new normal. Now, that's not to say that it would lead to a decline in employment, but it will mean that people will have to perform tasks differently, and, people may spend time doing stuff that machines are less capable of, or spend less time on physical activities. And then there's other trends that we have to also account for, net zero and decarbonization, the opportunities that come from transitioning to a clean growth, focused economy, the jobs that would create in low carbon sectors, that could, of course, offer opportunities for people to move out of low paid, low productivity jobs. For instance, we're seeing a rise in skills to support transition to low emission vehicles. Things like this will be more important. Digital transformation, I think everyone, is probably very much up to speed on that. We've definitely seen a massive acceleration and emphasis on digital as a result of COVID, and I expect that to fully continue, and let's not forget as well that our population is aging. People are living longer, and as people get older, we can expect to see more people shift careers, reinventing themselves, picking up other careers, and the training that I think people undertake in later life will be as important as what they do at the start of their career. And then moving closer to home, of course, we have EU exit and, what our future trading relationship with the EU looks like. So all of this actually, will have an impact on what we do going forward. And I think if we think about this very much from a skills context, where we have skills gaps and shortages in many sectors, we know skills shortages is costing UK businesses about 4 billion per year. And UK firms will say, lack of access to skills is the number one threat, affecting their competitiveness. When we talk about gaps and shortages, we know it is very acute in STEM and digital, and these are areas that we think will drive new opportunities. 9 in 10 STEM businesses will tell you they found it very difficult to get the skills they need, and we see that with a rise in demand for digital skills. On digital skills, it's no longer just important. I think it's absolutely core to the labor market, and we will see that sort of, see that as a central function. We will see that sort of, increase over time. And, people will say we're also likely to see a shift to the right in terms of basic digital skills increasingly becoming advanced compared to what we might view as, might have viewed as basic previously. All of this for me, points to the fact that we need to find a way to make sure that everyone continues to have the opportunity to learn new skills. If we look forward over the next 10 years, for instance, it's reasonable to assume that 80% of the likely workforce, at the end of the next decade are already in work. So whether it's to drive long-term growth, to address the impact of the current situation, or to deal with the fast pace of technological change, the reality is that we will need people to upskill for new skills. We will need to shift to a strong culture of lifelong learning, and we will need to recognize that it will no longer be just about what you learn, but equally important to think about how you continue to improve yourself and how adaptable your skills are to respond to new opportunities and shocks, and actually to deal with sectors as they grow and change over time. Typically, this has been something that government's worried about, and I would see it's fair to say that a lot of people see this as something for government to deal with. But I would say, this is no longer something for government to just handle alone. That time is absolutely gone. It has to be a genuinely collaborative effort where employers and individuals have an equal part to play. And I would probably say that businesses have a bigger part to play now more than ever before in recognizing the gains that investing in the skills of their workforce can have on their productivity and growth. From the government's perspective, addressing lifelong learning has, and it will continue to be a big priority. Many people would have seen the PM speech a few weeks ago where he talked about the importance of investing in skills, the need to level up between further and higher education, and he emphasized the importance of reskilling, upskilling people. He talked about the lifetime skills guarantee, which will help people to train and retrain at any stage of their lives and provide opportunities to develop skills for a changing world. And as he set out, we want to create less of a distinction between FE and HE, give people more of a choice and make it easier for people to be able to access that choice. The point he made about making it easier to get funding for higher technical courses, as you do for university degree, funding adults to a full level 3 qualification, making it easier to undertake high quality apprenticeships, rolling out boot camps to provide more opportunities for people to develop digital skills. These are all things that can help individuals build the skills that are most sought after by employers and can help individuals progress in work. Also boost their work prospects and ultimately make them more resilient as they adapt to changes in the labor market. So I'll probably end by saying that I won't pretend that we have all the answers, but I would like to leave us with 3 questions, which I know occupy the thoughts of my colleagues working on skills policy. And one is, how do we create a stronger culture of lifelong learning, making sure that everyone has the confidence, the time, and the support to do this? We need more employer investment in skills. How do we encourage that? How do we change mindsets? And how do we address concerns about uncertainty of securing a return on investment? And finally, how do we build more stable partnerships between the public and private sectors so we can work together to build out skills adaptability that we will need in a rapidly changing world? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Austin. Those are 3 really good topics for us to focus on. Now we've got Lizzie Crowley, who is the Senior Policy Advisor at Skills at the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development. Lizzie, over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so I work for the CIPD, and as an organisation, we're responsible for the people management and development profession. So that's 160,000 members who are responsible for recruiting and developing, the vast majority of the UK workforce. And I'm going to talk today about one of the key issues that, we've heard from our members as being critically important. Even before COVID, it was clear that the world of work in 2030 was going to look considerably different than today. Tasks, roles and entire jobs were set to transform as technology rapidly changes work and drives at the demand for new and higher skills. And given the pace of change, there was a growing recognition amongst employers and educators that it's very difficult to predict with any certainty or level of detail the jobs of the future. Instead, we were starting to have a much broader debate about what the common core skills are that we'll increasingly need. And many of these skills are the truly human capabilities, such as empathy and collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and resilience. These skills are absolutely fundamental to how people work effectively together in organizations, as well as how they engage with customers and other external stakeholders. The pandemic has only further underlined the critical importance of these skills, as the ability to be resilient, to learn and adapt in the face of such a challenge is vital for individuals and organizations alike. This slide sets out the projected emerging skills identified by employers in the Future of Jobs survey conducted by the World Economic Forum. And it's clear from this table the vast majority of skills that will be increasingly important are in essence these core transferable skills. There's been many research reports into this area, and all of them say, say things along the same lines. I mean, this is another report from Nestor and Pearson's, which took a longer lens view and used a very different methodology from the Future of Jobs survey, but it produced remarkably similar results. As you can see from the top 10 most in-demand skills and abilities they forecast for 2030 as set out by this slide. And given that the average lifespan of a tech skill is now estimated to be roughly 18 months, even organizations depending on deep technical skills will need to ensure that their employees are agile, resilient, and able to continuously adapt and learn. Yet, despite the growing importance of these skills, many employees and new labour market entrants struggle to demonstrate and develop them. Year after year, the Employer Skills Survey figures consistently show that for those employers reporting recruitment difficulties, it is these core or transferable skills that applicants mainly lack. And these challenges are not just visible amongst new recruits and school leavers, but they extend into the workplace and affect employees at all ages and stages of their career. This chart highlights the top 10 skills employers say need developing amongst their current workforce. And again, it is these broader human capabilities that feature the most, making up 7 out of the top 10 skill gaps reported. And these skill gaps affect the bottom line, impacting an organization's ability to introduce new working practices and new products, processes, and services. And while the pandemic and tech change has accelerated the need to address this skills mismatch, we need to recognize this is far from a new problem. Indeed, the CBI spoke about the need to improve these skills all the way back in 1989. Yet so far, we've failed to make much headway in addressing this challenge. So what can educators, employers, and policymakers do to bridge this skill gap and support individuals build these skills so they're resilient through the recession and the reshaping of the economy? From an education perspective, this needs to be about embedding the development of these skills across the education system. So this is not about standalone employability courses, but instead about the consistently providing opportunities to practice and build these skills throughout the curriculum. This means opportunities to present, to work in teams and solve problems, but critically, they need to understand why they are doing so and the importance of the skills they are building. Yet we also know that many of these skills are built and maintained through real experience of the world of work. So it's critical that young people are supported to have as many and as varied opportunities to engage with employers while still in education, facilitated by strong local partnerships between employers, educators, and civil society organizations. It's providing these types of opportunities in the current context is a challenge. However, we have already begun to see some great examples about institutions and employers working together to provide access to remote and virtual work experience and internships. However, action at the level of schools, colleges, and universities alone is not sufficient. Most of the 2040 workforce are already in employment, and we need to support our workforce develop these skills throughout their careers. So to do this, we also need to ensure that we're encouraging and supporting employers to adopt workforce practices that enable individuals to build these skills throughout their career. And I think it's really important to recognize these aren't innate, inbuilt skills or just built through experience. They can be learned. For instance, it has been demonstrated that coaching and mentoring interventions can be particularly effective here, as well as experiential learning opportunities, observation and feedback, with VR and AR, showing great promise in the development of these skills. Alongside this, there's important to consider how jobs are designed and tasks allocated within roles within organizations to allow staff greater responsibility and autonomy to problem solve, work on complex tasks, and that supportive line management is in place to enable all of this. And finally, a major barrier to tackling this challenge is that these skills can be difficult to understand because lots of employers and educators use different language to describe them, which creates a confusing landscape for young people and employees to navigate. So if you're out to make real headway here, all of this needs to be underpinned by a common and agreed language to describe these skills and a common framework to define, measure, and assess them. In recognition of this challenge, over the past 2 years, the CIPD have been collaborating with leaders across the education and skills sector as part of the Essential Skills Task Force with a shared ambition to create a common language and a framework for the skills that would span education to employment, enabling people to develop these skills throughout their lifetime. The aim of the works was to refine and test the existing Skills Builder framework, which is already being used extensively in schools. The revised version has now been launched and contains 8 skills covering communication, creative problem solving, self-management, and interpersonal skills, each with 15 skill steps from basic to skills mastery. And this is already being used by leading employers such as Boots in their recruitment and early careers activity. And we are continuing to engage with employers, government and educators and training providers to champion these essential skills and to equip individuals with the tools they need to develop them throughout their working lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lizzie. Well, three excellent opening contributions, and I'm pleased to see a really lively debate already getting going on the chat function. And trying to draw from that, I think there are two questions for our panelists, and I'm going to go through them in turn. One is the education system properly helping people acquire these resilient skills now? And putting my cards on the table, I think sometimes some of these skills are best learnt and developed by doing actual things, real stuff of interest to the individual. We've had an excellent example in the chat function of drawing conclusions from large data sets, which is a really important skill. It may be the best thing to get a way to get a young person into that is for them to be analysing some data in something that in a subject that really interests them, even if it's the performance of Premier League footballers, anything that means that they start engaging with a real data set. So in other words, some of these generic skills may best be learnt by trying to do real things, anything from taking apart a motorbike or making sense of a problem in philosophy may equip you with generic skills that are relevant for the future. Hence that brilliant description of education as what is left after you have forgotten everything you were taught. Is that the best way into these generic skills, or are there other ways? And then there's a second question, which I do detect just a flavour from the chat of we have been having this discussion in Britain for many decades. What is different this time? Why is there any prospect of our doing better on skills in the next few years than we have done historically? So those are two questions, and I'm going to go back to our panel in turn, starting with you, Ben, for your comments on them.
Thank you very much. I mean, I have to confess, in addressing the first question about the education system and whether or not it's working, is that both of my parents worked in education for pretty much all of their careers. And I have flashbacks to being a teenager moaning about my teachers and the fairly visceral reaction I would get to that. So I choose these words very carefully and make sure that I try and apply fairness to all. I'm conscious that some of the people in the chat have talked about coming out of the sector as well, and I'm conscious that the audience will have strong views too. Is the education system working for manufacturing? At the moment, I think the answer is it's probably about a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And actually the really critical point, and it goes back to your observation, Lord Will, it's about getting people's enthusiasm by doing things that are practical and realistic and driven by the things that they're interested in. We certainly feel in manufacturing that there's been a real problem in engaging with the education system, that actually in the last 20 years, it's although there are some shining examples of where this has been different, getting firms to be able to go into school and talk to kids about the excitement of manufacturing is really, really hard. And actually some of the things like the advent of the national curriculum and clearer focuses, and some of the people in the chat have talked about a focus simply on exam results, have actually made it harder to carve out the time to allow local businesses to go in and talk about what a fantastic and exciting industry manufacturing is. We also were really making a great deal of headway with a previous Education Secretary, Damien Hines, prior to the change in ministerial responsibilities, about understanding that one of the other big challenges has been the way in which schools are funded at post-16 level. And actually it's, for many head teachers, financially much more sensible to keep children on in the sixth form rather than encourage them into apprenticeships. And that actually has an impact on the way in which decisions are made as early as 12 or 13, when people are thinking about their GCSE choices and so on as they run up to the 16-year-old age group. So I think there are many, many fantastic examples of where the education system can work. As I said earlier, some really great throughput from GCSEs and A-levels into university for people to do highly skilled qualifications in engineering and manufacturing. But really, I think for us, the gap is getting the education system to work for people in the build up to and the choices they make at 16, encouraging apprenticeships. And if you contrast the way in which we prioritise and value technical education with the way in which some of our European competitors do, I think there's a very big gap there that could be filled by some changes in policy. I think that there is a degree of optimism that we can do it better this time, but there's also a degree of nervousness and caution. And the optimism comes from the fact that I think COVID and the pandemic are bringing a number of things into sharp relief. And I think that we really face a challenge if we want to be a manufacturing nation in the future, if we want to build on the renaissance of the last 20, 30 years, then we have to grasp this opportunity and really focus on getting kids into apprenticeships and getting adults into digital, in particular, upskilling. I think the success or failure of the government will whether or not it spots that opportunity, and also from a manufacturing perspective, the value that it attaches to our sector in the future economy. So I think we're optimistic, but a very, very difficult set of choices, and the policy view will come through, I think, as we start to see the comprehensive spending review and the budget outcome next year.
Yes, Ben, thanks. But can I just press you on a couple of points? First of all, how before the virus crisis, T-levels were the latest great hope, David Sainsbury's proposal. How are T-levels going? I mean, the anxiety that some of us have is that it's just hard to see how employers will step up to deliver the amount of work experience required in the T-levels. Are your members doing that? And secondly, the apprenticeship levy. The apprenticeship levy was partly designed so as to incentivize exactly the kind of creation of new apprenticeships that you're calling for. How are your members finding the apprenticeship levy?
So I think in both of those two issues, an ongoing degree of frustration. I think T-levels have not yet got the cut through. There's still a lot of people in manufacturing that aren't aware of them, despite quite a lot of effort both by ourselves and by government. And I think more needs to be done there. I think that the real challenge around T-levels is that, firstly, manufacturing isn't in the first cohort of industries to access that particular qualification. And secondly, the work placements are very, very long. At one level, that's quite a good thing because it gives people the opportunity to really understand the industry. But it is quite difficult for industry to, although there have been some helpful flexibilities in the run-up to the pandemic, the challenge for many employers is to find the time to be able to take on such a long work placement. And the other issue for people of that age cohort is that the additional safeguarding responsibilities of ensuring that people that they come into contact with are very understandable here, but those people are properly checked in a factory environment in particular, where you would expect a young person to move around, to learn the different facets of the particular part of manufacturing they're working in, and the number of people that they would normally come into contact with. There is a degree of nervousness about how you can operate a safeguarding regime in an industrial context and setting. And I think there are some real nervousnesses, and as a result, as yet, we're still yet to see a great deal of enthusiasm from people who want to grasp T-levels. So I think it could be part of the solution, but there are still some bumps in the road to iron out. In terms of the levy, I think what has happened as a result of the levy is actually in engineering and manufacturing a decrease in the number of apprentices. I think there are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that the money that's been assessed by the relevant body for how much a training course should cost is a lot lower than actually the investment cost that manufacturers have to make. It's actually more expensive to do an engineering and a manufacturing apprenticeship than the agreed sum of money that you can draw from the levy for it. So there is an immediate issue there that firms have to make up that shortfall, or training providers can't see a profit. So it's made that delivery and ability to access that training harder rather than easier. And for smaller companies, if they can't make up the shortfall and they can't find a training provider that's prepared to work at the agreed cost level, that's having a very visible and tangible effect. I think secondly, there are lots of issues about the mechanics of the money that goes into the levy and how you access it and what you can use it for. And there are periods over a 3-year apprenticeship where it would be useful to be able to use it to subsidize salaries. And I think, for example, looking at the next few years when firms are going to be very hard pressed, I think the range of flexibilities around the levy funding is absolutely critical to make it successful. The final element is, put bluntly, what Treasury was trying to do with the levy is to take people who could afford to pay for apprenticeships, get them to pay into the levy and to use some of that money to help pay for those very small firms that couldn't afford the cost. and effectively there are levy payers and non-levy payers, and the money was supposed to be accessible to both. I think the simple reality, given the challenge we face, is that we need to realise that apprenticeship can't be an area for cost saving, and there needs to be additional money, not just drawn from the levy, to really help those firms that are too small to pay the cost themselves if we really want to drive significant increase in uptake.
Thank you very much. We're now going to hear from Austin. And I think, Austin, again, looking at the very lively chat, one issue, given your responsibilities in BEIS as a senior official working on industrial strategy, is the extent to which industrial strategy funding is being used to drive this agenda. I remember from my conversations with successive ministers involved in this, one of the subjects I got very interested in is the extent to which a sector deal or an industrial strategy challenge could include expectations on employers investing in skills as part of getting that sectoral or challenge funding. How is that working out?
Thank you, Lord Willett. So as most people will know, you know, the 2017 strategy had people as one of the foundations of the strategy and of productivity. The whole emphasis on skills, the emphasis on working closely with employers is definitely something that we've tried to do. And if I stray into a little bit into the skills space, you know, we see an increasing push for more employee involvement, not just at delivery, but actually design of programs. We see an emphasis on training. You know, we've seen an emphasis on technical education. You know, so all of those things are things that we've tried to make part and parcel of our approach. The nature of policymaking is that we don't think anything is perfect, and obviously we keep trying to improve stuff. And so to your question specifically on industrial strategy, I think one of the things we've said previously is that, you know, although the 2017 strategy is pretty much a few years old, there's been so much, you know, change and potentially structural change to the economy from COVID and recent events that it's right that we take another look at the strategy and work out, you know, how we can make sure that it continues to be relevant for the times that we're in, and how we can prepare us for the challenges of the future. The questions you posed about, you know, sector deals and increased employer investment are things that we will look at as part of that work to look at how we refresh the strategy. But it remains very much the point that, you know, we are very keen to see what can be done to, you know, to try and drive more employer investment in. Very much, however, recognizing the fact that there are various reasons why it can prove difficult for employers, including some cultural reasons, but really trying to work closely with them to try and get underneath the skin of the issue.
Thank you very much. Lizzie, your observations on these questions, and I think I'm sorry, I'm adding another question to the list, reflecting the very lively discussion happening on the chat. Another issue is we've heard from Ben earlier that he's basically saying some types of skill training cost more than others. His view is that engineering and stuff involving kit, for example, comes particularly expensive. And I know in university funding, we certainly try to reflect that in the pattern of funding for universities. If we have standard pots of money, guarantees of funding for all people that don't particularly relate to the subject on which they're trying to develop their skills, how is that going to work? Your observations on that and the other questions coming through would be great.
So you're talking about the lifetime skills guarantee by government, or
indeed, yes,
yeah. Well, I suppose partly sort of. One of the things we haven't got right in this country, which means that, you know, which is partly contributing to the mismatch between supply and demand, is the lack of effective careers advice and guidance. So, I mean, this isn't just about the cost; it's about it informing the choice of what choices people make when they're able to choose the course which they think might support them in their future careers. So, I think sort of part of the way to sort of ensure that what we produce are the the economically valuable skills is to have a much better sort of a careers advice and guidance system. In terms of the different costs between how much these skills cost to develop, well, sort of that's something which I presumably we don't know the full details of this lifetime guarantee and the kind of funding behind that and how that will work out with the training providers. But I suppose it's sort of what we kind of have a view at the CIPD is that we need to get this up and running much more quickly. Next April is it's too late given the current crisis and the need for investment in this area. And what we've seen for a very long time in the UK is that for sort of adult learning, the budget has been slashed, I think, up to over 40% since the last recession. And this is the time when we really need it more than ever. And the other side, I think the question we talk about is around sort of boosting business investment. So actually what we've seen from the latest employer skills survey is a continuation of the decline in employer investment and training. And partly this is bound up by organizations with business models that actually don't require skills use. So if you look at the skills and employment survey, it showed that the training time to become proficient in a role has actually declined since the survey was last done. And so these things are concerning, and they really do play into the need for a really strong industrial strategy, which is about working with businesses to boost their competitive and product market strategies, and then put into place the training and skills development needs that supports that vision. And then I think just coming back to one of the questions you posed at the start, Lord Willits, was about, actually this is a problem which has been going on for a long time. And I think partly the reason why that is the case in the UK is that we lack, a system which is, has a long-term vision and ambition. We continually have chopped and changed. There's been about 60 skills ministers. And I think sort of what we really need is stability in the future system. And to do that, we need a national skills strategy and nationally and sectorally focused institutions, which are really about driving up and addressing the skills mismatches within sectors and within regions.
Thank you very much. There's a lot coming on out in the chat. I'm just trying to identify some of the themes to put them to our panelists for their last round of comments. I mean, several people saying the system is already very complicated. Can it be made simpler? Several people worried that there's such a focus on trying to record everything that young learners are doing that we tend to focus on the things that can be easily recorded and registered and examined. And some of the resilient skills we've been talking about, some of the ones that appeared in Liz's list, for example, may be relatively hard to record in the conventional way. So has our attempt to record everything pushed certain types of skills at the expense of others? I think that there's a desire for us to get on with things in this crisis. And in response to that comment of Liz's, I would just give a plug for the Australian Pioneer Fund, which I think it's called the Pioneer Fund, which they brought in as a crisis measure for young people who are not going to find jobs in the labour market during the virus crisis, of just a few months of training available to them. It's more ambitious than our Kickstart program, but which could perhaps have a stronger education and training element to it. So let's go round and collect a final round of comments, particularly people. What is the practical advice that you would give to ministers now as they wrestle with these dilemmas? They've got a framework set out in the Prime Minister's recent speech. We've got the apprenticeship levy, we've got T-levels, we've got this lifetime guarantee. So what is the most important thing that can be done within that framework to start delivering on the challenges we face? Ben, why don't you start again?
Many thanks. I mean, I think I think it goes back from our perspective in terms of what we would call on government to do, is to actually make the training that is so critical for that upskilling, for the recovery, for the transformation of the economy, is to make it accessible. And I think the challenge here is that I know that not every problem can be solved by pouring more money into it, but this is an area, particularly when the cost of borrowing is so low and the cost that government's already incurred is so high, would be a really sensible investment. If we could make access to high quality training cheaper and easier, and for those bits of training that require actual physical attendance, hands-on timing, hands-on work with machinery, with highly advanced robotics, highly advanced CNC machines, then there needs to be somewhere near to you where you can go and do that training, either as an individual or an employer. And I think if you wish to really accelerate this, an investment to allow training providers, FE colleges and so on, to offer really high quality training would be the most important step forward. And that could be addressed in the CSR and changes could be made by the end of the year.
I think actually the CSR now is going to be on a much more modest scale. I think we've heard in the last few hours that it may be another 1 year rollover, but given all the uncertainties. While you're on, Ben, can I just come back to you on one point that's emerging in the chat, which is this issue of older workers. Of course, we focus on schools and young people, but the over 50s, to what extent are your members willing to recruit people over 50s and realize that they could get over a decade of good quality work out of them? Could your members be more willing to recruit people at that age?
I actually think this is an area where manufacturing can be particularly proud of its record. And in fact, it's not even that manufacturers have to be persuaded to recruit people. In the time I've been with Make UK, I've undertaken enormous number of member visits. And actually, every single time, whether it's a big multinational firm or a small operation in a little unit on an industrial estate on the outskirts of a town, they are telling me that their workforce, they are working incredibly hard to keep people, not just in their 50s, but in their 60s and indeed in their 70s. I think in one location, there was a company that still had someone in their 80s working there. The critical issue in manufacturing is about both the availability of skills and the desire to develop new ones. And I think what manufacturers are finding is that skill set, because of the low number of apprenticeships over many, many years, because people have left the industry in leaner times, actually older workers are utterly invaluable. So there's absolutely no impediment to that recruitment. And indeed, many of those workers are very keen to acquire new skills because they enjoy their work and they want to work in the future. So I think in manufacturing, that's been a real success. And I think actually any firm that hasn't done that would be happy to do even more of it.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that eloquent account of the values of older people. Something, incidentally, of which the House of Lords is also an excellent example. Austin.
I hesitate to comment.
Austin, any final comments from you?
Only to say I've really enjoyed the conversations coming through the chat, and I think, as I mentioned in my early remarks, the Prime Minister's speech, pretty much sets a framework for how we start to look at these things. We're very much open to co-creation, of how we sort of try and deliver something that we all want to see. There's been quite a lot of work as well, in looking at how we make the FE system better, how we make technical education work for employers and make it on par with higher education. Lots of investment has gone into the skills agenda. And in many cases, sometimes it's not about something new. It's about how we make what we have better. So very much open to continue this conversation with people in the audience.
Thanks, Austin. Time is getting tight. Lizzie, any final quick comments?
Yes, sure. So just very quickly, I definitely agree with your comments on the Kickstart scheme, and we would also have liked to see a skills component to the job support scheme. They have that in many other countries. Secondly, the apprenticeship incentives, we've had a lot of feedback from our members that they're far too low, so they're not going to encourage enough people to take on new apprentices during the current crisis. Scotland's already increased them, and we should follow their lead and do likewise. And finally, just I think the FE white paper really does offer an opportunity to set a long-term vision for the sector, which is not just about providing, skills supply, but is about boosting skills demand through local partnerships with employers and addressing their skill challenges and, sort of improving their product and product market strategies.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. It's been a great discussion. Some really important points. Another one on the chat, the importance of diversity as itself delivering resilience. Robert, over to you for the final word.
Well, thank you very much indeed to all. It's been a fascinating hour and we've covered a lot of ground. On behalf of Resilience First and the Foundation for Science and Technology, I'd like to thank all the speakers and the chair for their superb contributions today. We will be circulating a short summary in due course, as well as share the slides to everybody. Finally, just for me to say, please do join our next webinar on the 12th of November, which will be looking at economic crime on the back of the pandemic with speakers from the National Crime Agency and Self-Reduce. So thank you all and have a good day. Goodbye.
Great. Thanks very much. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to you all for participating.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.